guys know Max Friend. He also works at Merkle. TechnicalSEO.com has lots of free tools. It's my little plug. He actually just released a new tool to help create how-to and FAQ markup, schema markup, so go check it out. Got a couple plugs in here for it as well. So, I've heard that this group is better than average in terms of technical SEO. So I wanted to pick some topics that maybe went into a little bit more depth than you had seen at your average conference. So we're going to cover a few different topics today that are all technical related and related to modern day websites that are using some of these more complex features. So a little bit about me. Associate Director of SEO at Merkle. You can follow me on Twitter at Petulla. I like to share as much as I can useful things, so definitely give me a follow. A little bit about Merkle before we jump in here. We do have a strong technical focus. As you've heard, we also do a lot with content strategy, looking at user intent by keyword and viewing content through a lens beyond just trying to capture as many keywords as possible. We have a lot of scale. We work with some of the largest clients in the world, so we kind of specialize in enterprise, which sounds like it might be very relevant to some of you in the room. If you want to come talk to me afterwards, we can talk about what kind of services we offer. Lots of Fortune 500, Fortune 10 clients in our roster. We really pride ourselves on our strategic thinking ability. We've also won several awards. We can now add a Landy to this list. We just won for B2B SEO at the Landys. And there are multiple ways that you can engage with us. We can obviously do a standard consulting relationship. We can also place people in-house in your companies. If you want someone there working alongside you, we can do short-term and long-term projects, so lots of different options there. So today we are going to talk through site migrations and replatforming. We'll talk a little bit about site latency and JavaScript SEO. So starting with site migrations, who all in the room has done a full site migration in the past? Okay, lots of people. Who in the room has one coming up? Couple. Okay, so hopefully this will still be relevant. I wanted to focus on some of the more advanced tips and pitfalls that you might not have heard about from your average conference presentation, things that we've seen at Merkle. So site migrations aren't a big deal, right? We hear this all the time. Someone in the client's business says this, they think they can flip a switch, do the redirects, and the migration is done. They're like, oh yeah, we can do it in a week, no problem. Well, what does a good migration actually look like? This is a real example that we pulled from one of our clients. It's pretty representative of what we typically see. And as you can see, you've got the wobble. Everyone who's done a migration knows about the wobble, at least for anything changing subfolder structures. And it can take a really long time, depending on the size of your site, to recover that wobble. So usually we say around 3 to 6 months, depending on the size of your site, because if you have a smaller site, maybe a little bit faster, but it's a substantial amount of time. So you have to kind of plan these around seasonality if you're a highly seasonal business to make sure that you are going to recover in time. Bad migration, risky. If you don't put in the work to do it right, this was a real client. It's actually the client we won the Landy with because they did this terrible migration and then came to us asking for help, and it took a year for us to recover from this wobble. Slow growth, baby steps over the course of a year, but we were able to finally recover it. But a year is a long time to wait for that to happen. So out of all of the migrations we've done at Merkle, we've seen about 30% of them fail. 30% of them have maybe recovered a little bit, but not all the way because they're not following best practices. So the main culprit, 301 redirects. This is where we spend the majority of our time when we're looking at strictly a migration. Replatformings are a little bit different. But what we're hoping to see here is something like this. You have your old URL going through one redirect directly to the new URL, regardless of how many changes you need to make in that single hop. Google sees this, they know exactly what you're trying to do. You'll limit your wobble period, update the index much faster. More often though, we see something like this. You might have a couple of redirects, especially with any kind of migration that's going to HTTPS and changing the subfolder structure. We usually see a couple of different rules used to handle these. Still okay. In my opinion, I would say I would approve this from the Merkle standpoint, but the wobble period is usually a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, you are going to effectively update the index. But you want to try and avoid something more like this. This is that minus 50% example we just looked at. We see this happen most commonly when people are trying to use rules to handle all of their redirects. If you have several rules, the logic can get pretty complicated and it's extremely error prone. So you might have one rule sending to HTTPS, you have one rule changing the subfolder structure, you have a mistake in your logic that then sends it back to non-secure, and then it changes the subfolder structure again. And something important to keep in mind here is Google will only crawl for 5 redirects. Anything after that, they're just simply not going to see. So you have a lot of risk associated with doing all of your redirects based on rules. We try and put the majority of our time into reviewing redirects in advance. So let's talk about pre-migration, 90% of the work, like I said. A couple of things that are rules to live by or tips that you might not have heard before. Murphy's Law, something always goes wrong. I don't think I've ever seen a perfect migration in all of my 6 years at Merkle. So try and look for the corner cases. If you're running your tests pre-migration on basic, straightforward examples, yeah, everything's gonna look like roses, but that's not, you need to kind of be testing the things that you're expecting to break, the things that you wouldn't always expect to work properly, and look for those corner cases. Also, A/B testing. We have seen with new site designs, we had one example with a client where they were building a new mobile site. And before they launched it, they wanted to test it on paid search, make sure that the conversion rate was strong before they indexed it for bots. But that can have serious implications for paid ads. This site was totally blocked by robots.txt. Because of that, all of their PLAs started failing as soon as they started sending traffic to it. So just keep this in mind. I mean, there are overlaps between the channels that you have to remember. Save all of your URLs and your sitemaps. This was one that was surprising to us when we first started doing lots of migrations. We would launch the migration and then ask our contacts, hey, can you send us a full list of those URLs so we can make sure that the redirects are working properly? And they're like, oh shoot, we can't get them anymore. So now there's no way for me to pull that list. Or the XML sitemap is dynamic, so there's no way for me to actually get the old XML sitemap. So make sure you pull everything in advance. Also, for HTTPS migrations, I feel like at this point, most websites are secure. Any non-secure is still out there? No. Okay, we're going to skip this then. Just make sure you check for non-secure resources. It's usually a default report that you can pull with your crawler of choice. Okay, so replatforming considerations. Anyone in the room have a replatforming coming up? All right, a couple, great. So a few things to keep in mind here. Make sure you review all of your templates. You might have a few templates that are not used that often, but all of them should be reviewed. It's really easy for changes to happen regardless of what your developers tell you will actually happen. So things like header structure, content, anything that's going to have a serious implication on your SEO should be reviewed in depth. Also check your crawlability. A lot of our clients are moving to new platforms that are heavy in JavaScript, and the developers say everything will be fine, and then they re-platform and everything is not fine. So make sure that you check this. We'll get into crawlability a bit later, but every single template, make sure you review as much as possible. Make sure you also conduct a full review. Your developers are guaranteed to tell you that everything will be fine. And I guarantee you it will not be if you do not do a full review. So just make sure that you're doing a full audit, you're planning ahead to have enough time to do a full audit, to look at as much as possible in advance. And consider testing with SEM. If you are re-platforming, you might have some changes to the way the site behaves or the way the site looks. And so testing with a paid channel can be a great way to kind of feel out whether or not you're going to have conversion rate changes or changes to an average order value, something of that nature. Okay, so we've reviewed pre-migration. We're ready to launch. We think, great, we can just flip the switch, go for it, right? There are a couple of things that also have to happen at launch for it to be successful, or things that you can do just to help it go a little bit more smoothly. Declaring the migration in GSC and BWT. Bing does have a tool for this as well, so don't forget Bing. Also test your robots.txt and GSC. This was a really interesting finding from one of our clients. We launched that same mobile site that I talked about before, and for weeks we were seeing we were still seeing our PLAs getting disapproved for having a blocked robots.txt file. And we checked time and time again, robots.txt is not blocked. So we didn't really know what was going on here. Come to find out, Google was using a cached version of our robots.txt. And since it had been blocked for so long, they went weeks on end without checking it. So running a quick test in the tester, it took 5 seconds. At that point, moving forward, immediately started respecting the new version. So quick tip on that. Also, you can inspect your primary pages and submit them to the index. This can be a great way to kind of show Google or tell them directly to fetch and index your pages. So if you have several that are your more important pages, I would recommend doing that for any that are driving the majority of the revenue. This is also something that we at Merkle recommend doing that isn't totally common. We recommend submitting the new and the old sitemaps whenever you're doing the migration. This can be a really good way to provide an access point for your old URLs, which might not otherwise exist. So in our opinion, it helps to kind of jumpstart the crawl for older URLs that might not be linked from anywhere that otherwise would take months on end to be crawled. We already talked about server logs, so I'm going to skip over that, but definitely review them. This can be a great way to understand if bots are prioritizing your site the same way you are, as Lionel discussed. Also, analyzing your crawl data. After you launch, this is a portion of our review that we always do, another full audit, just to make sure that everything in the live environment is actually performing as we expected. A couple of FAQs. These are some of the most frequently asked questions from our clients whenever we're doing a migration. How far in advance should I plan? At least a month, and that is like bare minimum. We usually recommend 3 to 6 months in advance just so we can make sure we have all the right conversations, get everything in place ahead of time. But anything less than a month is like a nightmare. How long until my site bounces back? As I mentioned at the beginning, if you're changing anything after the .com, 12 weeks minimum, usually longer, especially if you have an enterprise site. HTTPS, pretty quick. I mean, it sounds like everyone's already done it, but 2 to 3 weeks maximum, maybe faster. Can you migrate your site in stages? Google used to say no. They then updated their documentation to say yes. It's perfectly fine if you have a really large site to migrate your site in stages. If you would like if you want to just do one category, one subdomain, something like that, that should be perfectly fine. If you want to roll out some of the website first and then do the rest later, that should be totally fine. And also, if you only want to migrate part of your site, like say you only want to do one category, also perfectly fine. So any questions before we move on to site latency? Yeah?
As you've seen, and it's probably better for the after question, has anybody seen the break 2 weeks ago and the one supposedly on Tuesday with the upgraded migration that Google's doing in June, the update?
Yep.
You need different things, or does it keep breaking like it did in April and 2 weeks ago? The new sites being indexed. It was
new sites being indexed. Yeah, we don't.
Even older ones on pages. Like one of the issues we saw in April and before was big sites like Macy's and others. They can't even get their own page indexed that are on their own site that you submitted.
Right. So we haven't seen a lot change. Yeah, so I think the question is, have we seen any changes with the updates that Google has been doing recently to the way
fixing the breaks, yeah.
To the way websites are able to be indexed? Is it harder, easier, etc.? We really haven't seen any changes. We did see several of our clients have issues with the glitch that happened that was causing pages to be de-indexed. And we did have some issues getting them re-indexed, but since that glitch was resolved, I don't think we've seen anything long-standing. We always use the URL inspector, and it gives pretty quick feedback. So, other questions? Yeah.
I have a question. So how do we increase the frequency for the bots on the site?
Yeah. Good question. The question is how do you increase the crawl frequency, essentially. So there's not a good way to do it. In our opinion, the only real way to increase crawl frequency is to reduce the amount of budget each of your pages is taking to crawl. So there are several ways to do that. They're very technical. You can serve them pre-rendered content so that they don't have to render any of your JavaScript. that can reduce the load a little bit. You know, several things that are kind of like site-wide initiatives, but nothing really if you're just doing a migration to kickstart it per se. However, Google will typically crawl your site a lot more frequently than normal if you have indicated to them that you've done a migration. So if you use the site, you know, their tool that declares a site migration, typically for a few months they'll be crawling at a much higher level.
Is that a GSC?
Yes, it is a GSC. It's kind of hard to find.
Yeah.
It's, I would Google it and just find it through one of their old pages, honestly, because it's not easily linked, but I think it's still live.
I just submitted a new site map. I think that's good enough, but this is a different thing.
Different thing. This is to declare a domain change. So this is specifically for if you are changing to a new domain, new GSC property. Yes. Otherwise, sitemap should be fine. Yep.
Sorry, just to wrap that up. So if I don't do any migration, right? Like if I just updating my
Just general.
content on, just in general. So, so sometimes I would just manually kickstart the index thing on like the GSC.
Yeah.
Would that kind of just remind them that they come back more often?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have clients that do that a lot too. Like if you have a page that you've made a change to, you can certainly use the URL inspector to prompt them to crawl that page really quickly. It's not a sustainable method at scale, but certainly works if you have like a small number of pages and you want them to crawl it. That's the easiest way to get them to crawl it. You can also use a sitemap ping tool. We have one on technicalseo.com, and it will essentially ping Google to recrawl your sitemap. I don't know if it'll work on an ongoing basis. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, if it's just once, if you've made a lot of changes and you want to prompt to crawl at scale, you can use that tool.
Isn't there an API or something, and Bing has an API to submit?
There is, however, I don't think, I mean, Bing does,
Yes.
but for Google's, I think they have an API, but it's only for certain changes or certain pieces of information, not for everything.
Sure. What's the one tip you'd give to like an enterprise CTO in person?
Just any tip?
If
Ooh, that's a big question.
you had to just like, you're trying to grab their attention.
Yeah. My suggestion would be to put their SEOs in touch with their developers. I think that's probably the biggest struggle that we face in getting things done is giving recommendations to SEOs that then sit on them or try and fix things themselves or try and submit a ticket but aren't totally sure of how to phrase it, and we can be a lot more efficient when we're talking directly with the developers managing these tickets. I'd say everything would happen a lot faster. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned some problems with PLAs, and I'm aware with DSAs, if you block organic Googlebot, that will screw up DSAs. With PLAs, as long as you don't block ads bots, shouldn't you be okay?
That's a good question. So in this case, we had to disallow all, so they would have been blocked anyways. But I believe it was when we unblocked for Googlebot specifically, not AdsBot, that we started getting, that we started seeing approvals again. So I'm not 100% sure. I guess both to be safe, but it'd be something worth testing for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go over here.
No, that's fine. I guess, is there any like redirect counting tool? Because I know you talked about 5 redirects sort of being like a depth
Yes.
on Google crawling. So I've done several site migrations with HTTP to HTTPS and you know switching domains, but I don't really know if there's some links out there that are just not getting counted because of all the redirect. Is there any solution for that? Or?
There's not.
Okay.
I wish there was. Yeah, unfortunately, that's, I would say when we're reviewing redirects, that is one of the most time-consuming pieces is just making sure that we have a full list of all the URLs because there's so many old pages. We usually go through every single tool we can find. Google Analytics, whatever their analytics platform is. We'll just do site colon searches in Google, filtering out by page type until we get through all of the different page types to try and pull at least a full list of page types. Maybe not a full list of all the URLs, but all of the page types. That would be my suggestion, yeah.
To that point, archive.org is your best friend.
That's actually, it's kind of funny how archive, way back machine, right? Yeah.
Way back.
If the site's really old, there could be stuff from 1996 that you need to.
They got like a 12-year-old site, yeah.
I did this yesterday and it works great. I mean, for only links that are linked in the header or something,
Yeah.
you can do it.
So I'm curious, so bad redirect's totally like a problem, but just as big a problem is changes in the architecture of the site, the UI.
Yep.
So links being removed, content changing. I'm curious if you have any rules of thumb of how you guys approach that.
Yeah, it's a big question. We do a lot of site redesigns, and it's difficult because there are so many best practices. You know, you have SEO best practices, and you have your UX guys saying they have their own best practices, and you know, we're saying keep all the links in the menu, and they're saying no, we only want 5 categories and nothing else is linked. You know, and it's just this constant battle. So from what we have seen, we think larger menus work better. Like we've had several tests go through, and I think that's the most common example we see is a top nav redesign. So we see more links work totally fine. I've never seen an instance where removing links has improved performance in any way. We had one client swear by canonical tags, and we battled them. I mean, like, we really had never seen a client use only canonical tags and then, like, you know, slowly transition to a 301. But they swore that they saw no change with a canonical tag and a 10% drop with a redirect every time they did it. To be honest, we never tested it because we only use redirects. I mean, that's our go-to. We think that the wobble recovers faster. And canonical tags just get hairy in general because they can be ignored, and then you don't know, you know, what's working and what's not. And I just think it's a softer signal. So we always go with 301s. Does page speed really affect SEO? We get this question a lot, especially from people that don't work in SEO. So what's the answer? I mean, I think everyone knows this. Google released the mobile update. It included page speed as a mobile ranking factor. A couple of interesting things in their documentation when they announced this. They said that it's been used for a while on desktop. They said this is for sure going to be a ranking factor for mobile searches. And they said that it's intended to impact the slowest pages online. And that's kind of a big question mark, right? Because, like, what does that mean? Does that, because before they said anything that loaded in more than a second was slow. So what does that actually mean? We had mixed results, actually. We were working with one of our crawling partners and tested, this was not looking at scale, but testing like several clients in different industries. So what we found is smaller sites, it mattered less, likely because Google can crawl a lot more of a small site every single time. But with large sites, it mattered a lot. I mean, if your page was slow, those pages were getting crawled significantly less often. And to look at that in more detail, for large sites, we were seeing that they were being crawled in fewer than 20% of the searches for any page that was loading in more than 3 seconds. So it does have implications beyond just rankings as well.
I have a quick question. When you say load, tell me when you talk about first contact with me.
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, so this was, we ran this test alongside Spotify. So I know I looked into this before, but I would have to look back at what specifically they use as their page speed metric. But that's a good question. I think it's something with regards to total page load. I just don't know where the cutoff is in that. So how do I audit it? Page speed is one of those topics that I feel like SEOs are scared of. Everyone we work with has kind of come to this conclusion that you can't do a real page speed audit if you're not a developer. And in some ways, I agree. I mean, I think to actually submit the ticket, yeah, you have to have some input from a developer. But there's a lot that we can do as SEOs to help kickstart that conversation and understand the main focus areas. So we use multiple tools. Show of hands, who else used web page test before? Okay, so a good number of you. So maybe we won't spend as much time there walking through that. I'm sure everyone has used Page Speed Insights. We are not going to go through GT metrics today just in the interest of time, but that is a good tool to use just to kind of get more details and more granular reports. that will give more detail on the things that your other tools are showing you. So page speed insights. Since I'm sure everyone is pretty familiar with this, we'll go through it fairly quickly. It's now powered by Lighthouse, also a Google tool. Fun fact, they do have a Chrome extension that'll let you quickly run a Lighthouse report on any page that you have up in your browser. It can make it a little bit faster. It'll give you an overall number, an overall score. You can toggle between mobile and desktop. I'm going to sacrifice the Merkle site and use this as an example. Our desktop site's pretty good, but the mobile site needs a little work. So we'll use this as an example today. Underneath your summary score, you will get your field data. This is data pulled from the Google user experience data. This is real data from real users that are using Google Chrome. So this is a great place to look for real data, not data that's coming from the test that you're just running in that moment. It's aggregated across a period of time, so it gives you a good snapshot of how your site is performing on an ongoing basis. Not all websites will have this. Merkle actually didn't have this because we don't have enough traffic going to our site. So this is from another client, but you might. It's worth a check. I think it's really helpful. First, contentful paint. I do want to talk about this for just a minute because I think that as SEOs in the past, we've looked at total page load time primarily up until this point as our metric of choice. And it's not really the best metric because so much of the load happens after what you see visually when you first hit the page. So this first contentful paint metric will show you when a page visually starts to load. I think it's a great metric to use in addition to total load time because it does indicate to a user when it seems like your site is starting to load. And that actually makes a big difference, right? Like you're not going to bounce if you're seeing things starting to happen. So underneath that, we have lab data. This is your snapshot in time. Once you've run a test on your page, you're going to get these. One thing I find really interesting is these metrics are kind of divided into visual metrics when you start seeing things happen on the page. And then we have interactivity metrics. This is when you can start interacting with the page, using a filter, clicking a button, something like that. You also get the film strip view. Metrics that I like personally, these two are probably my favorite, is first CPU idle is when the page is minimally interactive. So it's a good one to indicate when your users can start interacting. Then you get this massive list of recommendations and opportunities, and it can be very overwhelming. In this session, we're going to go through some of the biggest ones that we've seen, most common issues that we've solved, or things that have been the most impactful. All right, one-page test. Similar but very different. You can run your test with any configuration of test settings. So you can set where your test location is, which does matter because if you're in San Francisco and you're testing from Dulles, it's a really long distance to travel, even for data. So you can set that. You can set your browser. You can configure it if you want to look at a mobile device. You can set how many tests you want to run. I usually like to do 9 because it just gives a larger sample, but you can do 3. Repeat view, you can select whether you want that. I would always recommend doing that. And then capturing the video. Great way to kind of visually see how the page is loading versus when all the resources. But start render, I really like, similar to your meaningful paint, contentful paint metric. You also get the waterfall view. This is kind of what we use this for at Merkle, the whole reason that we use this tool. So you're going to see, we'll take a closer look at it, but you'll see all of the resources that are loading on the page, how long they take to load, what type of resource they are, very visual. You also access the film strip view here, which we'll look at in a second. So close up of the waterfall, you can see you've got lots of different resources. You can see exactly what they are. You can see exactly what loads when, what type of resource it is, when your start render occurs, when your page is interactive at the bottom, and you can kind of see your main thread, how full it is, how heavy of a load it's carrying at different points. Film strip view, great addition to the toolkit. You can actually scroll across and see at different points in the visual load where that happens in your waterfall. So it can be a really great tool for more visual people like myself to kind of pinpoint exactly what's happening when. I also really like the content breakdown. It's a really quick and easy way to see what is taking up all of your requests, your byte transfers. So you can see on the Myrtle site, we've got tons of images in JavaScript. Could be a good place to start. But I think it's a really easy way to kind of set your priority level at the beginning. GT metrics, like I said, check it out. We're not going to talk about it today, but great tool. So it's a lot of data. How do I kind of take all of that and make sense of it, like do something with it? So, a few tips. These are my personal tips, things that I like to do when I'm performing these audits. The objective here is not to find everything. The objective is to find the most impactful things that your developers can implement quickly. So keep that in mind. We're not trying to like boil the ocean here. Keep it focused. Audit by template. We have a lot of our clients also working with Google on their mobile page speed audits. They do it the same way. They'll pick one template to start with. Pick your most important template, your home page, whichever page you need to convert users, and just audit that one template first. You can go through on a template by template basis, prioritizing that way. Don't rely completely on reports. You also have to like look at your site, right? You have to experience your site and see how it feels to you. When does it feel slow? What's starting to load first? Because those types of insights can be difficult to replicate in one of these reports. Like I said, don't try to fix everything at once. You can take one thing at a time. If you can get one thing fixed, that might save you 2 seconds off your load. So, one thing at a time. Time to first paint, time to first byte, any kind of start render metric, I would recommend adding to your list of benchmarking metrics as well. I think we've covered that, and work with your developers. If you only take one thing away from this, it's that. Work with your developers when you're doing that. This is how we usually like to think about page speed at Myrtle. There are 3 different ways you can impact it. You can reduce the number of requests. That's kind of like you go to a restaurant, you order 4 things, your server comes by your table 4 different times, and it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. Instead, you can just order everything at once. You can order everything as soon as you get to the table. You can order over the phone before you get to the restaurant, and all of that's going to make everything happen a lot faster. They can just bring you everything at once. You can also reduce the size of the request. This is like, instead of having 4 courses, maybe you only have 2. Maybe you only have an entree and a dessert, and you're going to be there for less time. You can also improve the rendering path, which is kind of like what we were just talking about a minute ago. This is a little bit trickier. This is like you're ordering things in a way that doesn't make sense. Like you say, this is what I want for dessert, but don't bring it until the end. And then you say, this is what I want for my entree, but I want to get my drink first. And it just like doesn't really make sense. The entire process is going to take a little bit longer. It's going to require just more time to kind of get you what you actually need right now. So if you order things in a way that makes sense, you'll be able to start your meal sooner. So we're going to go through each of these 3 buckets and talk about some of the most important things that we've seen, largest impact, and these are all broken into beginner and advanced, so things that you can usually pull from a report versus things that might not show up in a report. So reducing the number of requests. The most common thing that we see is caching issues. You are not caching assets that do not change. We like to say that all of your assets that are unchanging should be cached for a year. A lot of times we'll see assets only cached for a day or for a week, or you're not caching all of your assets. And this ultimately is going to make the repeat view faster. Pro tip, you can't do this for everything on your website, things like tracking pixels. You can't cache that because you need it to load every single time a user comes to the page. And this is what it looks like in your reports. A couple of more advanced pieces. We see this all the time with enterprise sites, tracking tags. A lot of times there will be 20 requests just from old tracking pixels that were added to the page that have to be requested every single time a user comes there and it's not even being used. Like you've used a new tracking partner. We had this with old Telium tags with one of our clients very recently, and just removing those old tags or removing any resources that you're not using anymore instead of just hiding them can make a big difference. Also, lazy loading. This is probably the largest impact piece we have seen for all of our clients across the board. We looked at Merkle earlier and you guys saw half of our load was from images. If we can lazy load those, that is always hands down the most impactful thing that we can do for our clients. If you do that, pro tip, no script tags. There's also, for the technical people in the room, intersection observers that I don't know too much about, but I know is an option. But at least no script tags. It's pretty easy to add no script tags for any images that are lazy loaded, and that can make sure that they're still crawlable. Reducing size of the request. This is usually compression issues. Image compression, compressing your text, even minifying your JavaScript. It's usually a very small savings, but a quick win. And then on the more advanced side, images are usually the main culprit of lots of bytes being transferred. So if you've already done your lazy loading, you can usually also look at the size of your images. We see a lot of clients use extremely high quality images. They're like massive images. Then they'll just kind of scale down for each of their device types. That can take a long time to load. So if you can look at other ways to do that, whether that's having multiple versions of your images or just scaling them for desktop and then sizing from there, can make a big difference. Image formats also, we see a lot of clients use like PNGs or larger format types when a JPEG is perfectly sufficient, so something to consider. All right, improving the rendering path. This is the hardest part. I think 3 years ago we knew how to do all that other stuff that we just talked through, but this was never discussed. This is like the new stuff. This is when you work with Google and they tell you how to optimize your website. They're trying to teach you how to look at what the above the fold render is. How can you get content to your user as quickly as possible? How can they see something as quickly as possible or use your site as quickly as possible? So the most common thing that we see with our clients is render blocking JavaScript. We see this all the time. A lot of times our clients will have 1 or 2 big JavaScript files, and it takes a while to parse all of that JavaScript. And all the time you're spending parsing, the rest of your page is not loading. The user is just waiting to see something. So a lot of times we'll recommend things like splitting your JavaScript file into critical components and non-critical components. If you can only force the user to parse a little bit of JavaScript first, they can start seeing things like images a lot faster. Similarly, we see, so this issue is kind of complicated, but the order that you're starting to serve your resources on the page matters a lot. If you're starting to serve below the fold content before your banner images, something of that nature, reordering so that you're prioritizing the above the fold content is always a good place to start. Any questions here? We're going to go through a quick example to kind of show how to think through this. Yeah?
Actually, I have a couple.
Yeah.
So do you recommend people using WebP at all, given that the browser compatibility can be a challenge there?
That's a good question. I've never gotten that question before. I actually don't know the answer to that.
I would say yes. You would say yes? I would. Okay.
Yes. We're going to go with yes.
Okay.
Do you want to repeat the
Use
question?
WebP.
The browser
And
supports
then-
it.
Oh, sorry. And then, are you still focusing on reducing the number of requests if they're under HTTP2?
Oh, that's a really good question. Not necessarily. Yeah, usually not. If they're using HTTP2, number of requests usually isn't an issue unless they're serving like really a lot of requests or have things that really are truly unnecessary. Yes, yeah. I mean, that's a much more complicated audit. So, but usually if a client is thoroughly leveraging HTTP2, we would look at other opportunities first.
Okay, thank you.
Quick audits in action, because I think it's one of the most difficult pieces here is, you know all the results you're going to get back, but how do you actually do this? Like, how do you run a test and think your way through all of these different considerations when there are so many different options? So we run page speed insights. This is for Merkle, so don't judge it too hard. We know it needs work. We're getting there. We see that our first meaningful paint, it takes a little while. It's kind of slow. Interactivity metrics are awful, so that definitely needs work. We get our opportunities in diagnostics, and there's a lot showing up. I mean, the first thing that you'll see here, lots of images. I mean, tons of time savings just from lazy loading images. That might be the place that we want to start, the ticket that we want to start with. There's a lot of callouts here for JavaScript and CSS. Yep.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, do these numbers always add up to the summary, like right above this? I don't
That's a
know.
good question. Let's go back.
Sometimes I don't think they kind of add up, and I'm not sure which which of the summary that you show in the previous page corresponds to any of these.
So I don't think they will add up, actually. I think they're kind of quantifying each of these separately, line by line. So
Okay, so they are basically, 8 metrics. Right?
yes.
I see. So each one of them kind of important.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to think about it from Google's perspective. Like, they're using a tool to identify these opportunities. So yeah, I don't think that they'll all be handled separately, because there's just an overlap between some of them occasionally.
I see. Then, sorry. Because previously you're saying that focus on the ones that's important, right?
Right.
If we have 7 of them for opportunity section?
Yep.
And you're saying some of them overlap, then what is the...
No, I just mean like if you were to take a calculator and like add all of these seconds up, like it's, I wouldn't look at it that way. I would look at this from broad strokes. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're thinking about this correctly.
Right, so
Yeah.
let's say the example there, like 0.91 second compared to the 8.55 seconds. So obviously the 8-ish
Correct.
second,
Yeah.
that one seems to be more severe, but then if they're parallel signals, then like which one is important?
Yeah, so going through this, I would definitely prioritize the ones that are going to save you the most time. So images first. Definitely images first, most impactful by far. But another thing we might look into is JavaScript and CSS opportunities. You're exactly right, though. Not a ton of savings there. So, might be something to look at down the line. Probably lower priority. Might be a conversation we want to have with our developers. Because also some of these, if they're quick wins, maybe we want to do it anyways. Like, maybe we want to minify even though it's only 0.15 seconds. Quick wins like that can add up over time. We might also look through our uncached resources, see if there's anything that we can kind of pick up there. We see that there's a lot of images in JavaScript in our content breakdown, so clearly images are the big ticket item here. There's a few different JavaScript files. A couple of them are from Merkle. Maybe we look at deferring one of them, or talk to our developers and see what those JavaScript files are doing, see if there's anything we can push later in the load, or see if we can, I don't know, combine them. You never know.
Switch out to add this widget.
We've got lots of third-party stuff. Maybe we can push that later in the load. Some widget stuff. I don't even know what the widget stuff is for. Might be something good to talk to our developers about. Tons of images, though. So many images. Lots of them are PNGs. Maybe we can use JPEGs instead. Definitely lazy loading below the fold images could be a good opportunity. I think a lot of these are in a carousel, so you don't even see them when you first hit the page. So it could be a great opportunity for us. So just a couple of quick takeaways here. Analyze your data. This is kind of the role of the SEO, right? Analyze the data. Write down your questions. See what opportunities you find, and then go talk to your developers, because that's ultimately the conversation that's going to make something happen. A couple of case studies here. So I pulled these 3 specifically because I think they highlight different things. We've got scale. There's different ways you can go about these latency audits. We've got scaled optimization, where you're looking at more site-wide opportunities. We've got template optimization, going through one template at a time and really getting granular on the templates that matter for us. And then we've got quick wins, even just taking the top 61 most used images on the site, only optimizing those, 1 second savings. I mean, that's still fairly substantial. Everyone knows JavaScript's important. Everyone knows that Google has the rendering wave now, and JavaScript is not rendered all the time. So these are some metrics on that. The orange is JavaScript. TLDR, it's rendered really not frequently. So there are a lot of risks that come with ignoring JavaScript. If you're not you know, if you're not doing things properly, you run the risk of bots not seeing all of your content, or not seeing all of your links, or not being able to access all of your content. Some pages might just go unindexed if bots can't access them. So huge implications. And it is important to keep in mind too, even if all of your JavaScript is crawlable, that still means that you're forcing bots to rely on that. You're forcing them to wait until the rendering wave to see your fresh content, and that can have its own implications. So when we're auditing JavaScript, I mean, I think this is a fairly new concept. There's not a lot of best practices out there on how to actually do this. So the objective here is to figure out what can I see versus what can bots see, and what are the differences between those two things. Keep in mind, the blue sky here is to render everything to all bots at all times. It is my firm belief that forcing bots to render your JavaScript is not a good practice. So delivering the fully rendered code to them should always be what we strive to get to. The issue here is it can be really time consuming to audit all of your templates for all of your crawlability. So we've bucketed these into 3 different types of reviews: visual, crawl review, manual review. Starting with visual review, this is something you can do with any sort of JavaScript disabler. Mobile-friendly testing tool is a good one that gives you a snapshot of the page. Screaming Frog screenshots, it'll give you screenshots of the page with JavaScript executed. So these are good ways to kind of visually see what's happening on the page. It's not the best practice though. Like you're not going to get accurate representations really from a visual, you know, a JavaScript disabler, Chrome extension, something like that. So good to kind of help you prioritize what you want to do next. Definitely not the source of truth. Crawl review is better. If you're using a crawl review, you're really running a crawl with JavaScript executed and JavaScript not executed, and looking for differences between the two. So you might be looking for differences in the number of URLs crawled. That could indicate that you have some URLs not accessible when JavaScript is not executed. You can look at your images that are crawled, your alt text, meta elements, headers, in links, out links. You want to make sure that all of the links are actually accessible on the page. So lots of different things to look at. You can use your crawling tool of choice here. We also have a really handy pre-rendering tool on technicalseo.com that you guys are welcome to use. It's free. It will let you see the HTML snapshot or the pre-rendered code for multiple search engines at once. So we usually like to review for Google and then maybe use the pre-rendering tool to compare against Bing, DuckDuckGo, any different bots or devices that you want. Still a little bit error prone. It's not going to catch everything. Manual review is always kind of the best practice, but this is a pretty good go-to if you're trying to get a decent review going. Manual review is really where we like to spend our time. This essentially means we're going through the code that Google is receiving versus the code that users are receiving and looking for differences. My preferred way to do this is using the mobile-friendly testing tool. It'll give you the HTML that Google receives, and you can kind of go through it line by line and see what's included, see what's not. Let's see, one important thing to keep in mind here, the mobile-friendly testing tool is currently the only tool that uses new Googlebot. So that's kind of why it's my preferred method. But there are a few different ways you can look at that code that Google is getting and compare it to what you're seeing in the browser. So how do I fix it? Once we've found all these issues, it's kind of like, okay, well, what do I do? Best option, this is also Google's recommendation, anything that you can serve server-side or pre-render or use dynamic rendering for, that's always the preferred option. Give the bot the fully rendered code. Don't force them to render your code. There are several pros of this. It means it's fully crawlable for all bots. I know Bing says that they can execute JavaScript. Our tests show that they don't. Even if they can, they just will not.
They just read it, they don't execute
Yeah,
it.
exactly. They just read it, they don't actually, yeah. So important to keep in mind. I mean, most websites don't have a lot of Bing traffic, but 5% can make a difference, I suppose. Also, the crawl budget. Any rendering you force your bot to do is going to take away from your crawl budget. So going back to that question about how to speed up your crawl budget or speed up your crawl frequency, this is a good way to do that. Cons, it can be difficult. I mean, this is like you guys are in the Bay Area, so you're like, just nothing. On the East Coast, it's a little harder, but yeah, it can be a little bit difficult. Sometimes you need a third-party partner if you're using like prerender.io, something of that nature, but best option by far. Mediocre is forcing bots to render your JavaScript. It'll still work for Google. If you don't care about Bing, fine. It's an okay option, but it has a lot of cons associated with it. It's not going to work for Bing and Yahoo. It's probably the biggest one. More crawl budget spent on your rendering, and your rendered content is not going to be crawled every time.
All right, thank you again. So that's it for all the various presentations for the evening. Just want to thank again Conductor under WeWork for hosting us tonight, especially last minute. Thank you again OnCrawl for sponsoring, and of course Melody and Merkel for speaking today. Just a reminder, we've got both, I think you have some papers as well.
Yes, I do.
I think we have some in the back.
I have some site migration checklists for anyone that wants to take one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't forget, there's still some food and drinks left over. Feel free. We will have the presentation later. I would recommend joining up on Slack so you can get it there. I'm trying to get more of you to sign up. It's always an additional push from my end. Reminder, of course, is to keep an eye out for the next meetup, Macy's, August. We'll see if that's 8th or 15th. Probably 15th. 15th, okay. Great. 15th of August. Put that on your reminder. Keep an eye so you can sign up and not accidentally get kicked out.